Over the past 20 years, Britain's diet has been turned on its head. The formerly exotic is now the everyday norm. The mainstream of British restauration is Italian, Chinese, Indian. There are 8,500 Indian restaurants. That is one Indian restaurant for every 117 Britons of subcontinental origin. This is an extraordinary figure. There are 5,000 Chinese restaurants, one for every 30 Britons of Chinese origin. This is an even more extraordinary figure. If that ratio of restaurants to head was repeated with application to other ethnic groups, then Britain would have 11,290 kosher restaurants instead of 25, 17,000 Caribbean restaurants instead of 90. It would have 26,000 Irish restaurants and 1,768,742 white Anglo-Saxon restaurants. Restaurants do not then reflect the intricate complexion of this country's ethnicity, of its racial and cultural composition, and of its mongrellism. Of course we live in a multicultural society, but then we always did. The difference used to be that diversity was occasioned by class and by place. Today it is assumed to be occasioned by racial origin. But 200 years ago, there was little cultural correspondence between the slave port of Bristol and the enlightened city of Edinburgh. And as for Norwich and Stoke... Hello? What restaurants do reflect is the willingness of immigrant people to do what the English, till a generation or so ago, were not willing to do. To be professionally hospitable.
Please, hello!
This can still be a problem.
Matches?
No, they're on order.
What's that? The bacon's raw? You a fussy eater or what? The bath's broken. So what are you complaining about? You haven't had a bath for 6 weeks. Only a joke.
Fawlty Towers was not a cartoon. It was social realism. Service is not something that the British have ever been happy doing. Best left to others.
Yes? Can I help you, sir?
What did he say?
Can I help you, sir?
One of the defining characteristics of the modern developed state is that a significant proportion of its people, about 8 to 10% in the case of Britain, will belong to ethnic minorities. And the proportion of those minorities who work in the catering industry is large. There are effectively ethnically determined catering castes. Each caste possesses a culture, economic devices, religious habits, social practices, group memories and so on, which is peculiar to it, and which affects its cooking and thus its restoration. Just as it's insolent to regard what's called the Third World as a homogeneous entity, so is it discourteous and careless to lump together disparate immigrant groups and their progeny, who between them speak 350 different languages, dialects and variants, a disunity which goes against the ideals of Urdu, Latin and even received pronunciation, which are intended to enhance breadth of communication. English is the world's language, yet it's only in England that it goes unlearned.
Open wide.
Every community or ethnic group is evidently different, but there are a couple of qualities that their restaurateurs share. The first is that they seldom wish their children to follow them into the catering business, which is all long hours, indifferent pay, and the constant risk of abuse by customers. And if the children don't follow, who will? There's already a diminution in the number of subcontinental restaurants. By the middle of this century, it may be that Kurdish and Albanian restaurants have come to dominate Britain. The second unifying factor is that there still exists a sort of Uncle Tomish caricature of generalised national colour and supposed national characteristics. A caricature which was originally willingly supplied because it was believed that there was a demand for it. Restaurants conducted themselves according to the allo allo principle of international relations. They bolstered stereotypes. They played to the gallery of prejudice, which was expected of them. How could people assimilate, even had they wanted to, if they were stuck in a placewalk of national costume, national behaviour, national clichés, national cooking? If they were obliged to carry the baggage of their former homeland, which precluded acquisition of new baggage? I could murder an Indian is a crass expression, even if it is not intended literally. Murder, as a synonym of eat, suggests a hatred of food, a resentment that the body requires food. It intimates that food is an enemy, an object of hatred, and that the body should be punished for its demands.
Okay, I want you to think inside the box, right, and then think inside the stomach. Right. Okay? Right. That's lovely. Okay, we've got the sag and chicken tikka masala.
I'm Neville Trevor, and over there is my masala birth buddy, Trevor Neville. Last year, for the third year in succession, we won the Wayne Clent Cup. That were after several years when we wasn't even placed. It's all down to our change of coach, training regime, increased lack of fitness and management. So, all credit to our respected coach and chum, the Dudley legend, Len Dredge, whose credentials are second to none.
I loved Wayne Clent. We come up through the juniors together in the Vindaloo years. Great rivals, but great muckers too. By the time we was in intermediates, we were training together. Southall, Tooting, Rusholme, anywhere that spoke the universal language of biryani.
Come on now, come on now. It's easy, these portions are very small portions here.
He had a cast iron duodenum and an asbestos colon. It was tragic that he were taken from us. Still, he went doing what he loved best, you know, a gut full of fowl, a paratha in one hand and a litre of lager in the other. I was right beside him when he exploded.
Don't speak with your mouth full, sir. Don't speak with your mouth full.
Anyway, Wayne's passing got me thinking. That and being rushed to the Albon infirmary had me stomach pumped again. That got me thinking too, so I hung up my poppadom, so to speak, and moved seamlessly into management. Bit like Trevor Francis, really. Come on, lads, I'm watching. Tuck in.
Come on, just one little bit. Come on, put it in. Oh, come on now, you've made space. Now fill it up. Come on.
Man's inhumanity to man's stomach. The Protestant curry ethic causes certain of us to turn the consumption of food into a display of masochistic machismo. This form of consumption is based in despisal of ourselves and in despisal of the culture which the food represents.
Come on, get that jaw working. 5, 4, 3. This could make all the difference. 2, and time. Well done, son. Lovely.
The peptic debasement which attaches to Indian cooking will not desist. This is perhaps surprising, For over the past 15 years, subcontinental restauration has endlessly divided. Where once there was the generic Indian restaurant, today there is diversity. We've learnt that hoppers come from Sri Lanka, that vindaloo is an edible pork dish from Christian Goa, which takes its name from vinegar. We flatter ourselves that we have become acquainted with regional authenticity. Well, perhaps. But note the climatic differences. England, cold and rainy. India, hot. The English adoption of a climatically inappropriate cuisine is indicative either of this country's culinary indiscriminacy or of its people wanting to be somewhere else, somewhere less grim, less grey, less priggishly governed. Either way, it's an inescapable fact that the more unsuitable a nation's cooking is for the English climate, and the more difficult it is to grow its ingredients here, the more likely it is to find commercial success. If you can find a Thai mail-order bride to enslave in a kitchen, you'll do well. Enslaving a Russian mail-order bride will not produce results. For the cooking which has had least impact on this country is that of Central and Eastern Europe, of those countries which share our climate, Poland, Germany, Russia, Scandinavia. This is not for want of immigrants from those countries, but their cooking remains so rare as to be almost exotic, as exotic indeed as old-fashioned British cooking, which is today an extinct species, a sort of gastronomic bustard. Because of our everyday familiarity with them, we persist with the lazily incurious usages Indian, Chinese, Italian as substantives signifying meals. Such usages reduce nations to a gamut of bastardized dishes. They debase civilizations. They transform cultures into cliches. And the packaging of food, whether in restaurants or for home consumption, is complicit in that transformation.
Ethnic minorities.
Minority ethnic.
Ethnic origin.
Ethnic minority groups.
Ethnic minority.
Ethnic fighting. Ethnic group.
We are all ethnic, yet some of us are more ethnic than others. There is a two-tier system at work. The cooking of certain nations is dignified by the name of that nation. India and China plus all of Europe and North America. The rest of the world is lumped together as ethnic. Ethnic cooking, ethnic knickknacks, ethnic clothes, ethnic music.
Ethnic minorities.
Minority ethnic.
Ethnic origin.
Ethnic fighting.
Ethnic is a euphemism. What it has come to mean is not like us. It is an expression of unwitting racism. Racial and tribal discrimination, whether negative or positive, is predicated on the idea that all people of a certain group are the same. We must know from experience of people of whatever group we belong to that this is not the case. France. Its ambition as a post-colonial power has been to make all its people culturally francophone, whatever their ethnicity. One means has been to subsume all forms of cooking, to render them French, to strip them of their peculiarities. This is one way of achieving racial disharmony. Britain has taken the opposite route. It has encouraged diversities, gastronomic as well as linguistic and cultural. But diversity spawns division and the establishment of de facto ghettos. And a ghetto of the mind is as defining as a physical one. This is a second way of achieving racial disharmony. The Eucharist is the most commonly eaten meal in the world. Its purpose is not sustenance, not pleasure. Its purpose is collective remembrance, the remembrance of someone whom no living person knew, prompted by the Middle Eastern staples of 2,000 years ago. The brilliance of this device lies in the recognition that food is both a communal bond and a mnemonic. Had a cult with a kindred rite come from, say, Germany, the sacrament would have comprised rye bread and beer. To amend the composition of the sacrament is an act of apostasy. When the Swiss sect called the Arto-Tyrites celebrated the Eucharist with cheese, they were wittingly divorcing themselves from the Church. Religious denominations thrive on dietary proscriptions. Fasting, feasting. Indeed, such proscriptions are an essential condition of a religion's success and survival. Islamist sky pilots didn't get where they are today by eschewing their religion's proscriptions. The Church of England, thank God, has no such proscriptions. Having no cooking to call its own may be one of the prices that England has to pay for its freedom from faith, its freedom from fanaticism, which is faith squared, its freedom from stoning adulteresses. It's a price worth paying. The restaurants in the de facto ghettos of London and Britain's other major cities are more than unofficial clubs. They are shrines. Their cooking is in remembrance of a sentimental identity. It is impervious to the generality of British cooking, whatever that is. It is literally nostalgic. It attempts to summon up a lost homeland. If you have some connection, however tenuous, with the old country, every mouthful tastes of longing. It is a bond of communal bereavement. It is a nationalistic Eucharist. Were this cooking to change, it would lose its symbolic potency. That's why it's set in stone. The only places where you can be certain of finding steak and kidney pudding and toad in the hole on the menu are expatriate joints like the British Club in Buenos Aires. The meaning of these places where people eat to recreate their homeland and affirm their identity is of course quite different if you belong to another group. Then they are merely sites of stay-at-home tourism. You can enter them, but you know you don't belong. You're an outsider, trespassing into a hermetic world. You can partake of the meal, but you're evidently not sharing the faith. You are a non-communicant taking communion, which can be a frivolously insolent thing to do. But the more often you do it, the more you empathize with that faith, with that nationalistic symbolism on a fork. Food, if we're not lazy about it, ought to promote curiosity about other cultures. It should lead us to try to understand the social forces, historical habits and religious exigencies which determine their complexion. Food may not be as portable as books, music on disc, films and reproductions of paintings, but it's as telling about the culture which ultimately begat it, perhaps more telling because it's quotidian, unself-conscious, artless. These remote islands of expatriation, and there are many more of them, typically unknown to each other, are alike only in their use of a sort of shorthand to summon up home. That shorthand invariably resorts to cliché and kitsch, but the sentiments of longing and loss and dislocation that it foments are genuine. The corniness of the outward expression is at odds with the depth of feeling it conceals. These places are both gaudy embassy and hallowed shrine. One man's meat is another man's folk memory. Imam Bayeldi belongs to a make-believe Turkey, where gin rummy rules, where Galatasaray is locked in perpetual satellite battle with Beşiktaş, where men dream of the great Ataturk, and where they worry about what to furnish their home with. Dumplings belong to a make-believe Czech Republic, which is proud of its belligerent ties to Britain. The inhabitants of this never-never land eat copious quantities of smoked meat. They drink beer and apricot brandy and dream of being in the actual stadium to sniff the women's basketball that's always on the digital. Kleftiko belongs to a make-believe Cyprus, where men play 10-card rummy and talk and smoke, and where there's always a game of backgammon on the go, where there's always time to dream of the old country, of its windmills and balmy coastline. While small restaurant businesses may share the same basic aspiration, to provide a living, the means by which they are funded varies from one immigrant community to the next. Indian restaurateurs are acknowledged as a sound bet by the high street banks. Chinese restaurants exist in a hardly penetrable parallel world of private finance, private security arrangements, private deals.
I'll raise you 1,000.
Premises and chefs are routinely staked in games of Go and poker.
I'll see you 1,000.
All right, come out one at a time and keep your mouth shut, all right? Right, you're a waiter. You're a waiter.
The restaurant, which is a shrine, a club, an expatriate community's hub, is also, of course, a commercial business. Who possesses the enterprise and the will to establish such businesses? That most governmentally reviled class of people, economic migrants. The division between economic migrants and those who are dignified as genuine asylum seekers is based on the questionable presumption that the right to observe a religious faith or to subscribe to political ideology is more deserving of protection and shelter than the desire to better oneself through commerce. Even if that commerce is in food which is prepared according to religious dicta, it is liable to be a force for secularization. Commerce promotes tolerance, cultural interchange, and beneficent mongrellism. Religions and ideologies promote none of those. Britain owes an immeasurable debt to people whose only reason for coming here has been to make, against considerable odds, a better life for themselves, and who have, in doing so, made a better gastronomic life for everyone. Our notions of national identity may be consequently skewed, but we can at least console ourselves with our tongue and our stomach.